I think we've always needed scientific advice because if you're going to develop a policy, it's good that it be based on some kind of evidence that is transparent and that people can interrogate, and that the policy isn't just based on gut feeling. So there's always been a need for evidence. But probably as we are in a period of almost exponential change, I'm just thinking about how quickly knowledge is generated and how many new technologies there are. We probably do need scientific advice much more now than we used to. I'll give you one example in data regulation. When the amount of data that was available about us individually was very limited, then we perhaps didn't really need any regulation to look at how that data is used. But as now we have so much data and we give our data away all the time on Facebook and social networks, and data is accumulated when we buy things on the internet about our preferences and so on, there is a need for science to give us possibilities about how we can still allow all the positive things to happen, and we can restrict the negative or unwanted uses of data capture. So it's a very interesting question because I'm hardly ever asked to offer advice on my own area of expertise. So I rely very, very heavily on the broad network of scientists that we have, not just in the European Union, but also globally. Scientists are very, very generous with their time. So if I phone up, and I think my title helps, so when they know who's phoning, they take the call and they are happy to advise me if it's their specialism, or even tell me who else I should speak to. So I can speak to individuals, but starting at home, which is a good place to start, I might ask the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission, so that's the in-house science service. And then as I looked outside the Commission, there are a number of agencies which are associated with the Commission, such as the European Food Standards Authority, Food Safety Authority rather, the things like the European Medicines Agency, all of these agencies, disease control, could be border control, whatever, I can ask them. And also there are a number of scientific advisory councils from the academies, which most member states have right across Europe. So those are just some of the starting points, and I'd also like to make special mention of the President's Science and Technology Advisory Council, which was inaugurated last year. And that council comes from different scientific disciplines across different member states. And again, I can ask them as individuals and they can put me in touch with people I need to speak to. So it's a lot easier than people might think. I mean, I don't have a super brain that knows everything, far from it, but it's almost that I know who to ask. Well, it might surprise you, but the most challenging aspect to me is that I get frustrated at how slow everything moves. So I think I'm quite an impatient person, probably. And if I think about my own scientific research, I still have a research lab. You're in control of what happens. You're in control of going into the laboratory, planning the experiments, doing them, interpreting them, and so on. Whereas when you work in an organization like the European Commission, things move slowly because there are 28 member states who need to be consulted about everything. And there's a European Parliament who have views and opinions that need to be taken into account. So for me, that's the one thing I find very frustrating. On the other side of that, the fact that there are 28 member states is a wonderful thing because they each have their own personalities, their views and opinions and expertise in different areas. And that really adds to the richness of everything. So there's a good side and a bad side to it. I can't point out a single area and say, well, they should have used evidence and they haven't. And I think you wouldn't find that now in the European Commission, because as part of the policy making process, there's a procedure called impact assessment. And that, well, it forces everybody at a very early stage in the impact assessment to accumulate evidence to be able to underpin the policy that's being proposed. So I think that everybody understands that we need evidence. I think where we could do much better, and it's something that I'm spending some time thinking about, particularly for the new Commission, is what changes we might be able to make so that it is much, much easier for different policy areas to access the best possible evidence. Because in many policy areas, they don't have the expertise to know, I said earlier, I know who to talk to. Well, that's because my whole career has been in science and I know about the scientific network. Whereas that's not so easy for policymakers who may not have access to those networks. So I hope that in the new Commission, we can have a much more refined and a much easier way for people to access high quality, credible evidence, and to do that also in a transparent way so that others, citizens, interest groups and so on, can understand what evidence has been gathered and what's being looked at when policy is being developed. Well, I mean, I would say that for every area, and it's really what I was referring to earlier, we could think about how we have a higher quality input of evidence at a very early stage. So as I say, that's something we're working on. But for me, in terms of how we might do better, I think it would be useful for people to have a clear understanding of almost where the evidence stops and where politics begins. Because you can have a very strong evidence base that sets out all the knowledge that we have, that identifies where there are uncertainties, and there are always uncertainties. And then even with that evidence, we can work with policymakers and we can define for them options of how you might proceed depending upon the evidence. But then there are a number of areas where there are strong interest groups and, for example, human stem cell research. So I can see how we might regulate stem cell research, taking into account ethical requirements and so on. I can also see how, for the citizen, the output of that research could be invaluable, particularly in an aging population. But I also understand that there are large groups, and this is the subject of a European Citizens Initiative recently, generally faith-based objection for religious faith, where people are unhappy with the use of stem cell research coming from embryonic stem cells. Now, it's just to make it clear, I don't disregard those viewpoints because they're strong viewpoints and they are strongly held. But the difficulty is to differentiate between what the evidence is and also what people's views and opinions are, which sometimes they don't care about the evidence. They just have a strong belief in something. And for me, that's a really difficult interface. And that's something where a lot more citizen engagement would be helpful, because scientists and policymakers and even sometimes politicians, they're a little bit removed from the actual citizens that we do all this for. And so one of the things I would really encourage is for scientists to get out and to communicate to people about the value of what we do. So to say to a citizen, what's in it for you if we do some embryonic stem cell research? Why is it we want to do it? And actually that's one of the great joys of a conference like the ESOF conference in Copenhagen, because there it's citizens and journalists and scientists and politicians and policymakers all getting together, and that's actually quite unusual. So I'm looking forward to that.